telling you to not have them all by yourself?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so there's a ratio of like adults to little people.
The whole group is here. Right.
But that is extended to do. And so first grandma's here. And yeah.
How you doing?
I was a little disappointed yesterday. I went to the our new educators thing, and we have a luncheon at Muckleshoot.
Oh, okay.
Like 5 people from Hentwood are now at Muckleshoot at tribal school. I was like,
Yeah, we just signed a contract. There's a lot of good stuff going on, I tell you.
yeah, there is some good stuff. They've done some really amazing work. But I was like, oh my gosh, you too. I was like, oh. Yeah.
Your whole life. I don't need to do it.
That's a big changes for everybody.
That's what I say.
Yeah.
We can run on the front. That's right.
All right. Oh, we're all here.
Yeah.
No.
Should we pause for?
I know, right?
Yes.
Take it as moment, take it in. Debbie's not on the screen.
I'm not on the screen. I don't know how to act.
While you're doing something else.
We're doing a selfie.
Oh, now we got a selfie. I'll wait.
We do exist.
Sure.
You didn't
Right.
abandon.
Are you kidding me? Just one.
There we go.
All right. All right. Good evening, everyone. It's good evening. Yes, happy Wednesday, as Dr. Harmon stated earlier. We are calling the meeting to order, and welcome to everybody this evening. This is a public hearing, and there will be a public hearing, beginning at 6:30 p.m. and following the budget presentation. If you plan to speak, I don't think we have an audience, but of constituents, that is. If you do plan to speak during the public hearing, you must complete a comment card before the public hearing begins. And so at this time, I'd like to ask Dr. Watts to open the meeting, please.
Absolutely. Thank you, President Venkatasalam, members of the board, Ms. Holly, staff, and community. I would like to call to the podium our Executive Director for Budget and Finance, Ben Rarick, who will be accompanied by our Supervisor for Budget, Lisa Tyler, to provide us with information that is important for us to know during this budget season. And our 1920 budget proposal will be presented by Ben. Ben, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Am I working here?
You were
Okay. Okay, so we're back at it. Just as a preface remark here, so I know these are a lot of information. So from a pacing standpoint, I'm probably going to try to be a little quicker, and you can stop me if you have questions, but I know these presentations could get long, and so I'll probably force you to stop me and just kind of keep the pace moving, and don't misinterpret me trying to go through the slides quick. Okay, so before we jump into the mechanics of the F-195, you may recognize this slide from a year ago. In the Budget and Finance Office, we developed a set of goals and metrics that we embedded in the larger strategic plan so that there were things that were specific and relevant to the financial health of the district that help support upward the equity work of the district. The notion being, if these things are not in place, then it affects our ability to fulfill our core mission work. So we developed these 5 goals, and it seemed timely to revisit them as we talk about our budget. The first was the 5% fund balance goal. We articulated that as having 3 years of 5%, so having it and then sustaining it. Eliminating the interfund loan. Remember, we used to not have enough cash to get through a school year. Third was eliminate our operating deficit, which is just very simply to not spend more than we take in a year. We talked about improving our bond rating to get to AA3 or higher, which is commensurate with districts of a similar size. And finally, to support the equity work through the budget through a number of initiatives that we can get into if you like, where we're looking at the budget and its equity impacts in our schools. And so as we take a look at where we're at on those 4 large goals, I feel like I have good news. We're making inroads in every respect, some more significant than others, but I really probably am more optimistic today about our budget situation than I have been at any point since I've been here. So that's a good thing to be able to say. We are going to meet the 5% fund balance goal this year. The question is the sustaining aspect of it. And so that's why you see the icon there of the upward arrow. You can't necessarily do the green check unless you've done all 3 years, right? But we can green check the interfund loan. We did eliminate that, and it would appear at this point that we will not have to retake in the fall, so I'm pleased to say that. You see the question mark with the bond rating simply because we won't have audited financials by the time we sell in the fall, and bond ratings are one of those things where it's easy to have it dropped and hard to have it improved. So we're in for a haul there, but I feel pretty comfortable saying I'd be surprised if it went down before it went up. All of our indicators are pointing in the right direction. We did, in fact, eliminate our operating deficit for this year. Next year will be the test. And finally, we are making some inroads in some of the ways that the budget plays out on our equity values in the district. When we do the budget, we look at, we kind of try to do the budget around major budget events. What's happening in the district that influences our budget other than just kind of carrying forward one year to the next? So here's a list of major events in our district that help shape our budget planning. The levy that's coming up, right? And the decision to go out for a piggyback or not go out for a piggyback is huge in this regard, as well as plans for our calendar year 2021. Implementation considerations for a whole slew of new state requirements, not the least of which is graduation requirements. We start to build a new school next year, and we'll talk about that in the context of the capital projects budget. We have another bond sale coming up in the fall, and we'll probably initiate, by the time the school year is out, a new boundary study, commensurate with the timeline of the opening of that new school. We're in collective bargaining with some of our largest groups. Every employee, not just in Kent, but across the state, will be choosing new health benefits as part of the SEP, which will have cost impacts for us. And there's a whole slew of new state mandates, all of which factor into the budget planning: K-3 class size, implementing the new levy subfund, changing account codes, et cetera. So I'm going to have Lisa walk you through reminding you about what this process is, by when we must complete it, and what you're actually adopting.
Good evening, everybody. So yes, thank you, Ben. So I'm going to walk you through I think 3 slides here, just about the overall budget adoption process, the dates, what exactly it is that you're adopting, and then Ben will go into more of the details of it. Again, I know you're all aware of this, but by law, actually, every district in the state goes through the same process of adopting their annual budget, and districts do adopt it annually. I say that because you may see that cities adopt biennial budgets, districts do not. So it's strictly a one-year budget following the school year. And so again, all districts are required to do that. They are required to be adopted, which you will be doing later this month, adopted by August 31st of every year for the upcoming school year. And the process of that is, districts start their budget process early in the year. I mean, we've been working on this for months. So basically it starts about December, actually. December, January, we're starting our budget for the next year. And there's a lot of steps and processes that go into that to get us to this point. And so we are not only working internally, but we work with our ESD. And when we actually complete our budget, we submit it to the ESD for a review and approval, and then it goes up to OSPI. So there's a couple of steps in there. And what you're approving, again, is the amount of authorized expenditures. So we do present you with our budgeted revenues and fund balance and things like that, but it's the expenditure authority that you're actually approving and adopting. Okay, and just a final note. you're adopting an expenditure authority with the idea that we won't exceed that. If we do, or if there were ever an instance where we were going to, or we thought we might, or foresee actually, because you would want to do this before you actually exceeded, there's a formal process that we need to go through if that's going to happen, and that is, it's called a budget extension, which really means a budget revision. It's referred to as the F200, which, if you recall, we did that last year. So there's a process for that, but hopefully we won't be doing that anytime soon again. Let's hope. So again, just some dates to align with the process. Again, we're almost through all of these dates. So early in the spring, we began our budget planning. It always starts with planning and working more internally, and we're communicating out to you as the board. And then as we get further along in the process, we present you with actual data and, things that you can actually see tangible. So April 24th was when we presented our first budget planning presentation. Later in May was our first work session, which typically that we're bringing to you a couple of things, kind of a clear budget status of where we are in the current year, and then we're also bringing to you our kind of a first look at our projected revenues on which what we will base our expenditure budget on. June 26th was the first actual budget work session on expenditures. The 14th, this date's on here because we are required to, as part of the process, hold 2 public hearings. And whenever you have a public hearing, there's notification. And so the public notice is actually happening as we speak. It's for 2 consecutive weeks. So that's what that is referring to. And then here we are on the 21st. So we are presenting you with a work session and detail information on what we, I don't want to call it the final budget, but our proposed budget for the 1920 school year. And also this will be our first public hearing regarding the budget. And then on the 28th, we will be adopting our annual budget for the 2019-20, that sounds so far out there, school year. Okay, again, as you know, we are not, when we adopt the budget, we actually adopt budgets for 5 separate funds. The main one, of course, is the general fund, which incorporates all of the expenditures basically for this school district, other than expenditures that are required to be accounted for in other funds. And there are 4 other funds that are required in that case. So we have our general fund, capital projects fund, which is used for major capital renovations and projects and land purchases, if that were the case, and things like that. Debt service fund is solely for the purpose of debt repayment. Transportation vehicle fund is solely for the purchase of transportation vehicles, i.e. buses. So that's not the general fund transportation expenditures. That is strictly for purchase of equipment. And then your Associated Student Body Fund, or ASB fund, is specifically for ASB funds and revenues and expenditures related to the school's ASBs. Okay. This next slide gives you a total overview for all 5 of our funds, and then with the total column of the budgets that we are asking you to adopt later in a couple weeks, or I guess that's next week. So what this slide shows is it shows our projected beginning balance for every fund, our estimated revenues, our proposed expenditures, which is line E. Now remember, line E is really what you're adopting. That's the appropriated expenditures. And then, all those numbers calculate out to what our anticipated ending fund balance for each of the funds look like. Okay. Any questions before I turn it back over to Ben? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so now essentially what we'll be doing is providing you some detail from that slide. That slide is essentially an overview of what you adopt. Now you'll receive slices by program, by activity, okay? They can be dense slides. I'm going to keep moving and you flag me down, okay? Okay, you've seen this slide before, which is a depiction of our revenues. the thing that's probably most noteworthy now is we've now eclipsed 80% in terms of the amount of money that comes from our various state sources. So state general and state special now exceeds 80%, which is a reflection of the depression of the amount of our local levy. Okay. A lot of detail here, and I'm not going to go through it all, but just a couple of things. This is the detail that that is the underneath of the pie chart you just saw. Okay. Where do you see the big increase? You see the big increase in state special purpose, right? So you remember last legislative session, where did we receive a lot of new money? Special education, right? We did receive more in LAP and bilingual, people transportation, okay? So major investments being made in the state special purpose pot. And then you also see a decline in local taxes, though not as large a decline as we were anticipating, right, given recent changes in state law. Here's a pie chart overview of expenditures. You can really narrow it down to 90% of expenditures in 4 major programs, which is the regular instruction, special education, compensatory education, and support services. Everything else is 1% or 2%. Okay, and then here is the detail underlying that pie graph. The one thing I would note here is that career and technical education shows as a budget reduction. What you're going to want to note about that is that we don't actually anticipate a reduction in spending in career and technical education. We were budgeted too high last year in career and technical education because we anticipated receiving more from the state. Okay. Okay, again, expenditures by object. Maybe something to note here. You've seen this pie graph for many, many years, year in, year out. The purple part of the graph is getting bigger and bigger. So payroll taxes and benefits continue to increase because we're spending more on healthcare as a state and as a district. Our pension costs and just benefit costs overall have been going up in nominal dollars and as a percent. Okay, and here is the detail that underlies that pie chart. Here's another one where it says materials and supplies is going down. The initial reaction to that might be, these are like cuts to schools, okay? It's not that, okay? MSOC allocations to schools are not going down. What's happening here is a big part of that materials and supplies are for categorical programs that receive a lump amount and make some determinations about how much of their money they're going to spend on salary versus non-salary items. So these are not cuts to schools. I just wanted to make clear that the MSOC allocation rates are not going down for schools. Okay. So we're at 81%, over 81% of the amount of expenditures that we attribute to compensation related at this point. And within that, referring back to that previous slide when you're looking at that 18.78%, if you broke that down, materials and supplies and contracted services are the largest parts of that pie. What I think is interesting to note, and what I've picked up in some community conversations, is people see contract services and they think consultants. Actually, consultants is a very small part of contract services. There are some very large payments we make out of contract services that maybe seem counterintuitive to being a contract service. But running start payments, all of our utility bills, our insurance payments, our licensing agreements, our out-of-district tuition payments and special ed, all of those fall under contract services and really constitute a majority of those costs. Actual consultants is a pretty modest part, but that tends to be a preconception as it relates to that category.
And then you can correct me, so any kind of transportation we pay for that's not by our own personnel
Correct.
is in there too. Yeah. Correct.
Like homeless transportation, also like American Logistics contract is there. And that's a big ticket item. So. Okay, this is a standard slide you get. Can you make a note on this, please, that on the gray column on the far right, those are percentage point changes. not percentage changes. So when you see a 1.17% change, that is comparing the two previous percents, okay? If you're a stickler for things like that, there's a real difference, okay? All right, so we'll get to some staffing slides. All right. So here is a slide that shows 16, 17, 17, 18, and 18, 19 actuals, and then compares to 19, 20 budget. And so you've seen this data in a variety of ways. We've been showing this to you on a monthly basis with our financial statements, and you've seen the geometric drop, okay? So this is consistent with that. So over 2 years, in the actuals, you're seeing a drop of 17.7 for classified and 117.3 for certificated, okay? And then you're seeing a higher budgeted number, but you would expect to, and we're going to see unpacking of that in a couple slides.
But on the certificated ones for this year, it's actually gone up. The number has gone up.
I don't believe, well, there's another slide that we'll get in some detail.
147
Yes, budgeted.
budgeted.
Next year.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so that, you would expect the budgeted number to be higher than the actual because we will have vacancies, right? But the next slide might be closer to what you're looking for, okay? So here's the data unpacking. There's a theme here, pie chart, data underneath the pie chart, pie chart, data underneath the pie chart. So here's your data. I'd probably focus your attention on the fourth column over and the fifth column over. So let's look at D first, okay? So D is budget, F195, the 2930 number, okay? Compare that to like January actuals. We're always going to see lower actuals by definition, right? We have vacancies, positions filled by the agency staff that aren't going to show up as an FTE. There's going to be rational reasons why actual is always going to be lower than budget. If it's not, that's a problem. Keep track of that one. And so to the point I think that was made, certificated instructional staffing overall is going down budget to budget, which you see in the second to last column, okay? Net budget to budget, we're up 30, okay? And those increases are in classified staff. But I hasten to add, and we talked about this the last time, probably the more surgical look at this is not just total staffing, but basic ed staffing, right? Because you saw in a previous slide where there's more money in state special purpose, right? And how's that going to be spent? Well, probably on staff. So, and that's not a problem necessarily to the extent that, you know, that's money in and out. We get it, we spend it. If we don't, we turn it back. But basic ed staffing is very much kind of the membrane of the fund balance, if you will. And we're down in basic ed staffing, budget to budget, by an amount of 55.3. So both things can be true. We can be down in basic ed and up overall. And actually that's, I would say, a good trend. We are more significantly leveraging our categorical dollars. Okay. I'm going to keep the pace here. Okay. You'll stop me if you need me. Enrollment. We're all very antsy for the first week of school. It's going to tell us a lot. Okay. Here are 5 look-fors. Here's a capture of our internal dialogue on enrollment. Okay. First week is huge. Have we stopped the drop? Okay. Did we stabilize as our spring data suggested, or are we going to see something similar to what happened last fall? Grades 6 and 7 have been anomalous in our data. Do you remember the graphs where we showed drops by grade, except for 2 grades? Grades 6 and 7 were up. and trying to figure out, is that something to do with the grade? Is that something to do with the cohort as it follows? So now are we going to see that in 8th grade? That's right around the transition to middle school. You know, is there some sort of private school dynamic? We're uncertain as to what's happening, but those 2 grades were durable as to total number of FTE, and be interested to see if that continues. EL enrollment was down in Kent and across the region, and I'm going to show you a chart on that if it didn't get, okay, maybe I'm not going to show you a chart on that. But part of what our demographer, the report that you read from the demographer last year was noting that for the first time in a decade, ELL enrollment in the region was down. We were experiencing geometric growth in the region, not just Kent, but all of our peer districts. And last year was the first year that it wasn't going up, and it actually went down. So it was a very significant change and had something to do, we think, with the overall drop in our district. We've had a charter school closure, and we're looking to see how that impacts. And we're watching several housing developments in the district that we think may start having an impact towards the end of this school, but definitely at the end of of this school year that we're talking about, but definitely into 21, 22. Okay. Here's the data table that you're very familiar with, and the highlighted 1920 shows the budget assumptions for the budget before you. You can see that last year we were 91.89 off number, but that's from the revised budget, to be fair. That was after we did the F200. But this is a helpful kind of historical rendering of what the budget assumption was, where we ended up landing, and the difference. The one thing that's note is it looks like we finally started catching up with Running Start. So Running Start always outpaced us on projections you see there. For years we were anywhere from 170, there was one year where 111, just tremendous growth on Running Start. This was the first year we actually were close, and actually a little above what actually materialized. So the actual enrollment assumption is that we will be down budget to budget, comparing last year's budget to this year's budget. We'd be down 136 students in the general ed K-12 enrollment, and then when you include ALE, Running Start, iGrad, it would be down 172. So we're projecting a modest decline. Okay. Any questions about that? Okay, I hope this is a good pace for you. Just keep going. This is a big year for the Capital Projects Fund. So let's just take a moment here. This is big. What's noteworthy here is, okay, we have been raising money through sales, bond sales, right? The voters approved a bond, and I think before I got here, I believe it was 2016. And so this is a big spend year for capital projects. So we will be expending almost twice as much on capital projects, which is all part of the plan, you know, but there's certainly more movement and significance in the capital projects fund than the general fund this year. There's a shift in terms of now we're building an entire school. We've got a number of large projects, multi-purpose rooms, and you've heard this before. But, you know, if I were to flag something for you, it would be, this is a major step for the district this year in the capital projects fund. We've accumulated some revenue as a function of a series of sales, and this is going to be a big spend year.
And this isn't probably up your alley, but I think we need to make sure we have signs and things that say your bond dollars at work at all those different sites.
Yep.
Good point.
Okay. Some of the smaller funds, the debt service fund is the fund that we use to make payments on the bonds. We collect from the voters who subsidize those. We make payments. Probably the most significant event is that, and it will affect debt service payments going into calendar year 20, is that we'll do another sale in the fall, just like we did last year. After we complete this sale, I think which is tentatively planned for November, we will have one more sale left from the original public authorization in 2016. So we have an assumed sale and assumed impacts to debt service in this budget. Transportation Vehicle Fund, these are smaller dollars, but nevertheless, I think it's about 5 buses that we're planning to buy, give or take. So that's basically what you're looking at here is the fund that allows us to purchase buses. Okay. Associated Student Body Fund, again, smaller dollars, but no less important in the way it impacts our kids. I have no particular comment here other than to say that we're really, as it relates to some of our equity work in the budget office, we're really looking at a full range of fines and fees and how that subsidizes ASB and the general fund, how it compares across districts to make sure we're living out our values in that respect. And then talking about significant budget events that shape this budget. We've got an important assumption. I've showed this slide to you once before, but it's important to kind of have on the record so everybody understands what the assumption is. Because we had some discussion about piggyback, no piggyback, what's the plan? So this budget does not assume a new level of authorization for calendar year 2020. This budget does assume that we would maximize that which the voters have already authorized. Does that make sense? So the law was prohibiting us from collecting all that the voters had authorized. Now we will be able to collect all that the voters have authorized. That's important to understand because in the fall you will be certifying to the county. You will be certifying an increase, but it'll be an increase that's already been voted on. Okay, and I know that's slightly counterintuitive, but we're in this new era of state laws where things did bounce around a bit. So if there are any questions about that, that would be worth clarifying. This is the first year that we're doing the levy subfund. I want to acknowledge the work of Lisa and Sarah and Carol. It's been a very tedious manual process. It's a lot of extra work. And so remember, the notion here is that for the first time, we will be able to demonstrate to the community, okay, local funds equal X, and here is how X is spent, okay? We toyed with different visuals to show you an overview of, conceptually, of what that means. This is what we landed on. So each bar chart represents an object of expenditure, okay? So expenses of certificated instructional staff, expenses associated with classified staff, that would be compensation and benefits, okay? Administrative staff, material supplies, contracted services, and travel, outlay, and other, okay? Just to give you a sense. So the takeaway from this would be, as you're eyeballing it, oh, looks like we're paying for the highest percentage of classified staff, right? And that should make sense to you because the state funds a relatively lower percentage of our classified staff, right? We pay for a commensurately lower level certificated instructional staff. The ratios, they pay for close to the number of staff that we have, but we pay on a salary basis more than the state provides, okay? Similarly for administrative staff, et cetera. So if there's a takeaway here, it kind of visually it gives you a sense, okay, there's a bigger chunk of classified staff and contracted services that's in the subfund than any of the other. Okay.
What's that average, let's say? Is it closer to 20%? If you put everything together.
Oh, I can do some quick math on my head, but I didn't calculate that. It looks like ballpark it would be high teens to close to 20%.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where it should be. I mean, that makes sense to me that it would be there. So, and this graph is not going to look that much different, I would surmise, with most any other district. Classified staff is where local levy dollars go, just simply because the state prototypical model does not fund a lot of them, and districts hire a lot of them. And I think on the certificated instructional side, most of the new collective bargaining agreements have basically said, okay, here's what the state pays on a per FTE basis, and then here's how much we pay more. So there's some local subsidy for pretty much every district, I think, is my guess. Okay. All right. So I tried to move that through that a little quicker and hope that worked. I brought the entire team, and I wanted to introduce them as this represents nearly 6 months of labor on their part. Carol Pisano and Sarah Dumlau and Lisa, and I think there's Allison and Allison Mance. And I want to acknowledge their work. It's a ton of work.
Thank you all for being here and for all your work. Are there questions from the board?
Yeah, I'd actually like to go back. Can we go back to the ASB slide? I was really interested in the significant decreases it looked like in student clubs and student activities. I'm wondering if you could kind of explain a little bit about where you see that and what.
Okay. You said ASB?
Yeah.
What, do you have a slide number there?
I don't, because we
Okay.
only have 3. Yeah.
There, that one? Okay.
Yes.
I'm sorry, and your question was?
Significant decreases. It seems like in some of the revenues for athletics clubs, those types of, I'm just wondering, is there kind of a trend, or what's going on kind of with some of those things? Or
Yeah, would you?
Sure.
So, first of all, overall, it's the students and the clubs that actually prepare their own budgets.
Right.
We don't prepare them centrally. So they have a lot of input, and as required for the students to compile their budgets. So they're the ones that are telling us. Once we receive their budgets, then on top of that, we do build in a certain percentage of contingency just for those unknown things that might happen throughout the year. So there's that. But then, as far as the decline, the ASB fund is one where you don't want those balances to grow or to get too high. So we had, over the past few years, we've actually had some room for the ASB balances to be drawn down somewhat. And so that's what we see. So we're managing the ASB balances in total. Carol actually works with the ASB staff, and I'm going to point to her in case she has anything else she wants to add.
Come on up, Carol. Thank you.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
Oh, it's okay.
She's ready.
What Lisa's saying is a pretty accurate statement. What happens, again, is they work hours and hours, the clubs, on their budgets. They send it to us. We look them over and look to see that they're a reasonable expense, of what they want to do. So, but their clubs are growing. They're trying to bring in more clubs for diversity. So I think that's where we see some fluctuation as well.
And I think, because one of the things that we've seen on prior that we don't see here is the actuals for 18-19. If you look at 17-18, it's a lot smaller, $1 million, $1,004,000 less. And so I'm wondering if 18-19 is going to come in between those two numbers, then you might actually looking for an overall increase. Compared to just the 18-19 budget, maybe it was too much, I don't know.
Yes, and for them, they have grand dreams of doing things as well, and then they get in there and, we can't do this. So I think as 18-19 will come in pretty close to what their budget was.
So it's not necessarily participation, or when they come up with their budget. So I'm looking at like athletics. I mean, it's not necessarily a lack of participation necessarily. It's more of what?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it has to do with participation. It's just, from year to year, their plans are going to change. Like, for example, they may, if we see a year where the revenues are budgeted high, there may be some clubs that plan to do this great car wash that was going to generate thousands of dollars. Whoops, well, maybe it didn't quite generate what they expected. But, so that we're finding that kind of that sweet spot with ASB where we want to make sure that we've budgeted enough to allow them to do what they want to do, and the budget's there. as opposed to having something really unreasonable, so.
And, right, and not having to do a budget extension for ASB. Got it, okay. So we build in some
Right,
contingency.
right. ASB is one of those funds that we really build in a really comfortable amount of contingency, because it's could be a lot more flexible than some of the other funds. And that's okay to do that. It's very common.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't have any questions.
Just to say, I look back over all the questions I asked for the last 2 years. I probably normally have 60 questions. I actually only have 2 that you haven't answered, so thank you for
Okay,
that.
all right. Well, that means I've got to do the job on 2 then.
Right. Well, one is just a confirmation. So this goes way back to like slide like 14 or 15, which is expenditures by program. And looking at specifically compensatory education. So the
Yes.
change from budget is up, but it shows like 4.7. But the change from like the last 2-year actuals is very high. So 25.5 million, and now we're looking like a $13 million increase. Wanted to confirm like what are those planned expenditures compared to the last 2 years?
All right, can I have just a minute on that? That was, all right, so can I have some, can I phone a friend here for a second?
Anybody who has the answer.
Do you want to ask your questions and then, because could we do to both of them and then I can go back, because I'm on my feet, that's going to be a hard one to answer, but I could see if I got some support documentation back here.
Sure. So the one was on staffing was, if you go to you probably go to, what am I at, slide 24, 25, something like that? If I
Okay.
see it again, I'll remember the
Okay.
question. That's enrollment and sessions.
Back?
Okay, sorry, go back.
That
I
one?
guess that was it. So when we're looking at here, we're looking at changing certificated staffing, going down and going back up. So this is what it was. Are we meeting the K-3 class size staffing ratios in order to maximize the revenue from the state in that number we have there for projection?
So Mariah may wish to speak at some point, but I'll just give you some facts. So this budget assumes compliance in grades K-3 and staffs to the 17 to 1.
All right, thank you. That was it, that was my 2.
Okay. All right, so.
Because it's compensatory education, I want to guess what it is.
Yep,
This is
I
categorical
think-
spending or things like that, but
Can I have just a minute?
that's all right. I'll take it.
All right, we're all going to take a shot at this because there's quite a bit. So compensatory, you're talking about LAP,
Yep.
bilingual, title, which we experienced a significant increase in, and what else is in that group?
So, yeah. Thank you so much. So it is all the programs in our 5,000, our 6,000 series. So as been mentioned, it's all of our title programs, our LAP programs, as well as bilingual. That's both Title III and state-funded bilingual. And so what's really driving those expenditures, as Ben mentioned earlier, is really dollars switching from MSOCs to staff, which is going to naturally drive up the total dollars tied to those programs for expenditures.
Which slide was that? What slide was that one on, Ross?
15 or 16? 16.
16. Okay.
Or sorry, I guess it was 14.
14.
I didn't think when I said the one right at the top. That one.
Okay.
Because I'm matching that to, I guess, the 2 ones back, right? We're seeing the increase in revenue, big increases, state general purpose, state special purpose. And so if we're saying, hey, a lot of that state special purpose
Yep.
is going right into that compensatory education, that's why we're seeing like a $13 million jump between actuals,
In budget.
projected actuals and budget was what I was looking at.
Yes. All right, so
from
I
that
think I have an
standpoint.
answer, but if you could just hold it, so. Okay, so part of why that is a fairly precipitous increase is, I think, a slight change in philosophy where we budgeted those programs, those categorical programs, to spend their allocation and their carry forward. So that drives the budget up. Now, whether we see an actual change commensurate with that in spending is different, but they have now the capacity
Yep.
to spend their base and their carry forward, and some of these programs have significant carry forward. So it looks like a huge increase in spending.
Yep.
It just simply gives those programs the authority to work all the way through their carry forward if they are able to do so.
Right, 'cause, yeah, from our standpoint, we're approving the total budget authority, therefore
Correct.
allowing them to do whatever they get
Correct.
this year plus rollover. from
Correct.
last
I
year.
would be stunned if every bit of that budget
Right.
authority is exhausted. But it, conceptually, it gives everybody the ability.
Okay. That was it. Thank you very much.
So,
All right, apparently I got that one right, so.
Hey.
can you go to the slide on transportation, please? I don't know which one it was. So I know in years past, we have made, we were trying to level out or get our buses so they were all more current. With the 5 more this year, where does that put us as far as, do we know, are we on line? We were replacing buses, we have an older fleet.
Do you know?
And we've been doing, is this part of that plan of how
Yeah.
we're doing that?
I would assume we are on that plan, and I do know that Justin, yes, he is on a plan, and it seems
About
like
5 last
since
year,
I've
too.
been here, he's purchased between 5 and 7 buses each year.
Right.
So that tells me that, yeah, he's on a plan to cycle through.
Israel, if you would add additional context, thank you.
Yes, I think you recall that we've done a couple things over the last couple of years. There was a few more than 5 or 7, but we got rid of a fleet and then replaced with about 10 to 12 buses that included the 5 or 7. And we continue to look at that and we can come back to exactly where our fleet is, because we need to know what do we look for in the future to continue that. We're also looking at increasing our natural gas buses, including electricity. That's another area that we are looking at a grant to help us with that. So, but we're always looking at making sure that we're replacing those buses that are aging out.
What is the cost difference between the diesel, natural gas, and electric? I mean, is it,
Ooh, that would be out of my
I don't even know the exact
range.
cost, but I just know they're not all equal.
Right. Well, I can tell you different costs. So natural gas, we have to actually have a full station for that, and that is a huge cost, just to have that. And so if we do increase our buses, we're going to have to increase the station. So we have to look at that as an extended cost. So we want to be careful that we're not, that we have a good balance of that. So the key is having a fleet of buses that are going to meet safety requirements, and that we look at ahead of time that we are replacing regularly so that they can meet those safety requirements. And so we're constantly doing that. But we can get you the data that you need that can answer specifically how many buses and what are we looking for the future.
And even how many, like, natural gas
Huh,
buses
the
that
full
we have
breakdown.
now, and what the percentage of the fleet is.
Absolutely. Yeah, we can do that,
Changing, so, yeah,
including costs.
yes, thanks. Thanks, Liz.
Can I ask one more question on this? I just noticed that line 34, so we don't have any transportation equipment repair budget? Curious why we haven't in the past and why we don't now.
Mechanics are really good.
I know they're really good, but
Talking about a different fund.
does it come somewhere else?
Right. They do, of course, make routine repairs.
Right.
What that line item is specifically for would be major, I mean, it would be a major repair, probably to the extent of we would be, determining whether it would be cost-effective to do that or purchase a new bus. So, of course, ongoing routine repairs happen all the time, and that's out of the general fund's
would be under
transportation department's budget.
Okay,
Yeah.
great, thank you for that clarification.
To add to Karen, Director DeBriller's question, Israel and I were at the session this morning for our bus drivers, and I did get a chance to hear from Justin. The reality is, when we move to, based on the grant dollars, they are significant because, as we know, new technology usually is not cheaper. And my understanding is that a bus may cost somewhere between $300,000. Those new electric buses would be funded in large part by the grant. So that would certainly, costs would be offset, but obviously those expenditures are going to increase. Now, we said electric is new technology, not driverless, just electric. Right.
And we have room enough in our transportation area, bus garage, yard, it's not a garage, it's yard. We have enough room for another extension of the natural gas?
Yes, we do. So yes, and we are also always looking, so how would we increase that if we get additional buses? In fact, I've had that conversation with Justin in that, as you know, our pool we're scheduling that to be done. And so right now we're looking at just creating parking there because the need is there. And then we could better look at how we're going to utilize that. And so we're going to keep that for parking so we could block that off as we need it. And that's where our natural gas station is, really close to that. So, yes.
And my final question is regarding the classified staff. I do think it would be really helpful to see, since we are increasing those budgetary authority for the what do we call the compensatory education. It would be helpful to see it align with the staffing and how that works. Like, for example, considering the costs of lab and what are the associated classified staff for, to kind of look at it from that perspective. Because I think we're going to need to provide a better explanation of that variance, you know, the fact that classified staff looks higher, and what that means.
Sure.
So is it possible to get a better, I don't know, a
Yeah, we can
graphical-
actually answer some of that right now, and then we could get you a chart,
Okay.
a chart that didn't make the cut, but, and I'm looking at Allison because it's the chart you and I talked about last week, but many of the classified staff increases, I'm looking for some confirmation visually here. Special ed has a significant increase in classified staff. It also has a significant increase in funding. And so we can show you where the increases in classified staff are by program, and we have that chart probably in the binder behind me somewhere, so we'll make sure you get that.
All right, thank you very much. All right, any other questions? Okay, hearing none, thank you to the team.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great.
Thank you, team.
Look forward to it. All right. And so at this time, we will recess the meeting for a public hearing at 6:30. We are adjourned. No, I'm repeating it here. So. Oh. Okay, I know there's only Ms. Hamada in the room. I'm not sure if there are other constituents, but we did say at the beginning of the meeting, if you could please complete a comment card if you wish to speak.
Florida didn't get that hot, but it was just like hitting right. Wow, 5 in the morning. So we might get 82 degrees. Humid everywhere. Yeah. Everything's just yeah.
Okay, so I would check lunch.
All right, good evening again, everyone. And we will call the public meeting to order at this time. I'd like to welcome the audience again, and this is the public hearing for the 2019-20 district budget. If you plan to speak during the public hearing, you must complete a comment card before the public hearing begins in a few minutes. During the public hearing, the board will listen to but not respond to the comments from the visitors. And when it is your turn to address the board, please state your name at the start of your testimony, and please limit your remarks to 3 minutes. You will hear a timer when 3 minutes are up, and normally I would ask, please be courteous and stop your remarks when your time is up. So at this time, we will now receive comments on the 2019-20 budget adoption, and any person wishing to submit written or spoken comments regarding the proposed budget may do so at this time. And we have one comment card. So, and that would be Ms. Leslie Hamada.
Good evening, Leslie Hamada, Covington resident, 28026 189th Avenue Southeast. Good evening, President Van Gendosselin, Superintendent Watts, and Board. First of all, if I would have known I could have spoke tonight, I would have prepared a speech. But honestly, I've been alerted to this hearing at the last minute, and I honestly did not know that public comment was even allowed. And that's from a person who has testified numerous times in Olympia, has testified numerous times in various hearings. I hold the position of the 47th LD elected position for my Democratic Party and testified on Washington State Democrats. So I would consider myself a fairly educated advocate. So I'm wondering, number one, if we are so concerned in this district about transparency and communication, where we're having our website redesigned, we're having community conversations with our board, and we're trying to do better communications, why are we not communicating it tonight? And next week, in 7 days, we're going to adopt a budget, because there's 2 people here from the community tonight, and I'm sure there's a lot more in this community that would like to know about this budget. It's no mystery that's been a serious problem in this area. And to go to board docs and not find any documentation within 24 hours, and I guess I've just been alerted at 4:42, which I would have had to leave my house to get here on time before I could see that, and look, some documents were posted. And if you want to have an informed public that comes here to make public comment, how can you publicly comment on something you haven't even seen? It's impossible. So I would just say, if you're really serious about communication, we need to do better about saying, other than posting on page 12, the Kent Reporter, probably in very small print that I can't even see, that you're having a budget hearing tonight. I know that it's uncomfortable to talk about money, even our own household sometimes, but I have learned from managing a lot of people and going through a recession in business that was pretty bad a few years ago when I was still working, that the only way you face these things is by facing them, not hiding them, and not doing them at a meeting that people really don't understand. They can come here, and even I didn't understand, I could testify tonight. So that's one thing I want to talk about tonight. I'm excited to hear that perhaps we're going to buy 5 new buses, and I would encourage you to have those natural gas buses. I know the benefits of doing that. I'm very familiar with that, and maybe it's a little bit of an output in the upfront, but the total cost overall and the environmental impact would be tremendous. I'm very familiar with that. I also want to encourage you to have that iGrad budget fully and transparent, as we talked about, and fully instated. Haven't seen those numbers. And as for being compliant about K through 3, that's probably true. I can't prove that K through 3 is 1 through 17, but I've had 4 teachers email me that they now have class sizes in the 4th grade of 30 students. Thank you very much for your time.
right. Thank you. Seeing that we do not have any more cards or comments, I would like to ask a motion to close the public hearing, please.
I so move that we close the public hearing.
Is there a second?
A second.
Okay, motion has been made and to close the public hearing, and motion has been made and seconded. Thank you. Are there any other discussions or questions? Comments? Okay, hearing none, I'm calling for a vote to close the public hearing. All those in favor say aye and raise your right hand.
Aye.
All those opposed say no and raise your right hand. All right, motion passes, and the hearing is now closed. And we thank you all for joining us this evening. All right, have a good evening. We're adjourned.
Put this in April, that's what I.
Yeah, it's been out, but it's
We've
been
been
out,
there
like I
for a
said,
while.
people have been posting it all over discussion.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah. That was nice. The 17th, Saturday.
so you're, is up there. Yeah, lots of August birthdays. We have a lot in our family.
Yeah.
Thank you, too.
We do too, we have a lot of August.
Our immediate family, I think we have 6. All before the night.
Oh, that's a lot of cake. That's a lot. That's a lot of cake and parties.
Yes. QFC's bakery in business. So